Hello and welcome back to the Xamarin Forms tutorial where we work on a time tracker app. I'm Patrick and this is the Let's Create series. As mentioned in the last video, today we're going to start working on this recent activity page. Instead of login going to dashboard, which is a tabbed page, and then dashboard showing the first page being the time clock page, we'll instead go to this recent activity page, which will sort of be like an overview or a landing page. And when you click clock in, then this next page will appear modally. So let's get into the restructure. So we'll head over to our project and we need to add a new page and a new page model. So we'll right click on pages, add new file. We'll make sure forms is selected and we'll do the forms content page with XAML and we'll name this recent activity page. Once that page is done being created, we can get rid of the code behind the .cs, and then we'll go into page models and we'll do the same thing, add new class, and this will be recent activity page model. As with all of our page models, they must at some point extend from page model base, and then we can use a quick fix to import the using. And the next thing we'll need to do is register this in Page Model Locator. So we'll head over to Page Model Locator, and beneath the registrations for our other pages and page models, we'll add a registration for recent activity page model and its page. So that's the setup for all of that. We can get rid of the Page Model Locator, and let's head over to the page and start setting this up. So inside of the content, if we look at our design, we'll see that this is probably a good candidate for a grid. So we'll have the top row, which will be the header, and the bottom row, which will contain everything else. And then we can add our buttons separately, and at the end, we can put it in row 1, and then give it a negative top margin, and that'll pull it up. So over in our project, we will create a grid, and we'll give it those row definitions. And so the top can be something like 280, and the bottom will just be all of the rest of the space. We can use our SK view that we used on the login page. So let's head over to the login page and copy this SK rect gradient view. We can copy that and we can paste it right in the top of our grid, and we'll get an error because this XML namespace isn't declared. So let's go ahead and declare that. We can copy it from login page, or we can just type it again. It'll be XML-NS skviews equals skviews, and we have our views folder. So we'll just import that one. So that takes care of the background of this top header view. Let's go ahead and put a placeholder stack layout in place so we can eventually get to adding these children. So right under that, let's go ahead and add a stack layout. And in here, we can just provide a simple comment for now, and this will be the header layout. And then under that, we can make another stack layout, and this will be the bottom content. And so this one needs to be in grid.row equals 1. And it'll need this kind of row here, which can be a horizontal stack layout. So inside here, we can put another stack layout, and we can say orientation is horizontal. And then in here, we can add a label, and its text can be recent activity. And we can just say its vertical options are center for now. And then we need that button. And so this should actually be a bindable button. So we need to import the namespace for that, XML and S. And we can just say buttons is fine, and then buttons, and we'll get a recommendation for the views.buttons namespace, and let's go ahead and bring that in. And then we can use a bindable button here, and then we'll give it a background color of transparent. We need to give it its binding context of something like binding view all model, because if we look at the design, we'll see that this is going to be that view all button. So we'll also want to set the attributes to not bold. It'll just be none. And lastly, we'll want to give it a horizontal options of end and expand, just to put this all the way at the right side. The next thing we're going to want inside of our stack layout in the second row, or grid.row equals 1, is a frame. So we can say frame, and we can give it a background color of something like white, and a corner radius of something like 20 is fine. Has shadow will be true. And if we look at the design, we'll see that it has that left and right margin, but so does everything else in this stack layout. So we can just apply the left and right margin to the stack layout itself. So let's go up to this parent stack layout, and let's give it a margin of 20 and 0. So 20 left, right, 0 top, bottom. And so that'll apply to this stack layout so that the label and the button aren't touching the end. It'll also apply to our frame, but we don't want the frame to have that big padding that's by default. So let's set its padding to something smaller like 10. And then in here, let's just add a stack layout. And so this one will be our recent activity list. We also want to add this background color. And so the background color here is this EF. So let's go ahead and head over to app.xaml, and let's add a new color here. So under gradient end color, we'll add another color, and we'll call this one background color light, in case we have a darker color later, and this will be EF. And now when we save that in app.xaml, we can head back over to recent activity page, and we can just set the page background color or the grid background color, either way is fine, to that background color light. So I'll just do the grid, and so we can say here background color equals static resource, and now we can use our background color light. The last thing we'll want to do is head over to the login page model, and we'll change that login method so that it doesn't go to the dashboard page model. We want to go to our new recent activity page model. With that done, we can go ahead and try the app. And so I'm going to launch it on an iPhone 12 simulator. You can use an iPhone or an Android, and Android is going to have one less problem because Xamarin Forms doesn't do so well with the frames and their shadows on iPhone, but they do pretty well on Android. So we're going to fix that in today's episode. But for now, I'm going to run it on an iPhone so that we can get into the second part of this episode, which is fixing that frame shadow. So we'll go ahead and run the app. And I'm going to log in with my test user here, and we can see our layout. So a few things didn't really work out so well. We're missing our view all, and that's because of our button model is missing from the page model. So let's go ahead into our recent activity page model, and we're going to need, basically, let's look at the design. We're going to need two button models just for now, so we can do the clock in model and the view all model. So let's add those to the page model now. So we'll make our public button model, and this will be the view all model. And we'll do the same thing for our clock in model. With those two created, we can go into our constructor here, and we can instantiate both models. So view all model equals new button model, and this one's going to say view all, and it needs an action, so we'll just say on view all, and we can use a quick fix to generate that method for us. And then we'll do the same thing for the clock in model. So that'll equal new button model, and this will be all caps clock in, and on clock in is just fine for the method name, so we can generate the method there. Now we don't want to get crashes when we just click these buttons. They don't need to do anything, but we definitely don't want crashes. So let's go ahead and get rid of those 2 throws. And that should be okay for our page model for now. And then back into the recent activity page, we'll also see that our frame is pretty condensed, and that's because its vertical options need to be something like fill and expand. And we should probably let this stack layout have 20 margin all the way around. So let's just get rid of that 0. This way it'll bring our frame off of the bottom of the phone screen. And lastly, we need our bindable button for the clock in button. So let's bring in bindable button. And this button model, or so binding context, will be binding clock in model. We're going to put it on grid.row equals 1, and we'll give it some margins of 0, negative, something like 30, and 0, 0. And if we just leave it like this, the button is going to extend the entire height of the second row. And so to get rid of that, we should just set its vertical options to start. If we press save, hot reload will take care of a couple things. When we ran this app, we didn't have our page model fully fleshed out, and so we're gonna miss both of those button titles. But if we stop the app and rerun it, we should see clock in and view all. And with our app running, we can see that we're starting to get closer to the design. Let's go ahead and get rid of the navigation bar up top, so we can say navigation page dot has navigation bar equals false, and that is up in the attributes of the content page. So that'll get rid of that. And the last thing we want to do today is clean up this Xamarin Forms frame, because you can see not only does it not match our design here, but we want to be able to manipulate the shadow of a frame anyway, and we want to do that from XAML. So let's go ahead and stop the app, and we'll head over to our views folder, and let's make a new folder in here, and we'll call this layouts. So here's where we're going to make some extended layouts, and we're going to start with an extended frame. So let's add a new class, and this will be extended frame. Extended frame is going to extend from frame, and then we'll use a quick fix to bring in Xamarin Forms. We can get rid of the constructor because we don't really need it right now, but we do want a couple bindable properties that we can use in XAML. And so these are going to be public, static, read-only bindable properties. And so we're going to make 3 of them. And the first one is going to be the shadow offset property. And this will be a bindable property.create. And then we'll use name of. And this will be shadow offset. And if you get shadow offset property, just delete property. And this will be a type of, and so the offset is going to be a size or a point, X and Y. So I'm going to use point. And so then the declaring type is going to be the extended frame, and the default value will be point.0. And we'll take care of that shadow offset error in a moment. So that's our shadow offset property. The next thing we want is something like the radius. So public, static, read only. And this will be a bindable property as well. And this will be shadow radius property. And this bindable property dot create and name of, and this will be just shadow radius is fine. This will just be a type of float, and the declaring type again is extended frame, and the default value will say something like 3.0f is fine. And lastly, we want an opacity. So we can do read only bindable property again, and this will be shadow opacity property equals bindable property dot create, and we'll say name of, and this will be shadow opacity. This is also going to be a float, And like always, it needs to have the declaring type. And the default value here we'll say is 0.8 by default, because I'm pretty sure that's what Xamarin Forms has implemented anyway. And I think their radius is actually like 5. So let's go ahead and change this to 5. And so our radius will be 5 by default. Our opacity will be 0.8 by default. And now we need to make these actual properties. So we can say public float, and this will be shadow offset. Nope. Offset is a point. So we'll say public point shadow offset. And this will return a casted get value, and we will just get the shadow offset property. And then our set will set value, and it'll set the value of shadow offset property to the passed in value. Let's do the same thing for radius and opacity. And with all 3 of those done, we can save, and we're going to head over to the iOS project. In the iOS project, we're going to add a new renderer, so we can right-click renderers, add new class, and this will be an extended frame renderer. Once that extended frame renderer is created, let's go ahead and extend from frame renderer, and then we'll use a quick fix to bring in the using, and now we have our frame renderer created. Up above namespace, let's go ahead and add this to an exported renderer. So we'll say assembly export renderer, and we use a quick fix for Xamarin Forms, and we can say type of extended frame. And then the other parameter is the renderer itself, extended frame renderer, quick fix to bring in the namespace we're in right now. And then we have a couple things we need to do here. So the first thing is intercept when the element changes. So we'll say override on element changed. And we want to know if e.newElement does not equal null. And if it doesn't, we want to update the frame's shadow. We also want to check, so we'll override on element property changed, and we want to know if the property here is the frame's shadow. So check if property is the frame's shadow. And then lastly, if either of those are true or they work, we don't want to duplicate code here, so we'll make a private method that will update the shadow. So update shadow. Okay, and so in both places here, we'll just update frame shadow. So let's actually do that. Update shadow, we'll just call the method. Here, we want to intercept if it is one of those 3 properties that we declared up top in the extended frame. And so we can check that here. We can say if e.propertyName is equal to, and this will be extended frame dot shadow offset property dot property name, or, and we're going to do that for the other 2 as well. So e.propertyName is equal to extended frame dot shadow opacity property dot property name, or, and this will be the last one. So if it's equal to extended frame dot shadow, and this should be radius, I believe, property dot property name. So if any of these are true, let's update the shadow here. Otherwise, we'll just do what the parent renderer does, and it does do some shadow updating, which we are intercepting just here with R3. Otherwise, it does other things like the shadow, corner, background color, all that. So we don't want to not call base. We just want to intercept it in case it's one of ours. And so updating the actual shadow itself is pretty easy. We'll just check to see if element.hasShadow is true. And if it is, we'll actually update it. Otherwise, we'll just set its opacity to 0. So we can say layer.shadow opacity equals 0. So that'll get rid of the shadow. Otherwise, we want to set its opacity, offset, and radius to the 3 properties that we made in our extended frame. So to get those, we need to cast it to our extended frame. So we'll say var extended frame equals element as extended frame. And so now that we have our extended frame, we can say layer.shadow opacity equals extended frame dot shadow opacity. The next thing we want is the shadow offset, and that'll be a new CG size, and this is going to be the extended frame dot offset dot x, or shadow offset dot x, and the same thing for y. The last thing we can set here is the radius. So the shadow radius will equal extended frame dot shadow radius. If you were going to be updating any of the other properties as well, like the shadow color or something like that, you could intercept it here and take care of it here as well. Just for what we need, we don't really need to do that. But we are at a good point where we can test to make sure our frame looks okay. It should look the exact same, but we should be able to modify it in XAML and see hot reload take care of those changes. Except heading over to the page, I noticed that we're still using the default frame, but this build should allow us to switch it to an extended frame during this build, and we should see hot reload take care of that anyway, so we should be okay there. So I'm going to give this a minute to build and run, and then we'll start messing around with it. So with it running, as expected, since we're using the regular frame, no change. So what we need to do is bring in our new layouts namespace. And so we'll just call it namespace. So XML-NS layouts, we'll call it layouts. So XML-NS layouts equals, and then if we just say layouts, it should recommend the right namespace for us. And then we'll change frame to extended frame. And now if we save, we'll see hot reload. We'll just make it look normal, just like as we already had. But now we can change the shadow offset, for example, and we can make it like 0.3. And if we save, we should see that shadow move down a little bit, and that's good. We can also change the shadow radius, for example, and we can just make it, instead of 5, we can make it 3. So if we save, we see it get a little smaller, and now it's really dark, and so we can change that also. And so we can say shadow opacity, and we can set this to something like 0.25. And so if we save this, we should see our shadow get a lot lighter. And now we can update the shadow, some different properties on the shadow right here in XAML, and it'll apply to the iOS only. Unfortunately, this doesn't really fix anything on Android because Android really isn't broken. Android looks pretty good. So you could, if you're running this on Android, then your shadows pretty much look all right already. But this takes care of the iOS side. I think that's a good stopping point for today's video. If you like the video, feel free to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments section. Thank you for watching the Xamarin Forms tutorial. I'm Patrick, and this is the Let's Create series.